Hello, and welcome to our first episode on the trilogy of South African killer cops. In Greek mythology, Hercules is known as a hero, but his story takes on a very dark turn when he, under the curse of Hera, falls into a rage and murders his wife and sons. The tragic act of familicide sets the stage for our exploration of South African Police Sergeant Uyselen Nel, whose life mirrored this myth in chilling ways. Apollo demanded Hercules to master several tribulations before his spirit could be cleansed of the evil. Uyselen Nel had many internal demons to conquer before he could find his peace. On February 10th in 1996, Uyselen Nel killed his wife Natasha and their two young sons, Marius, age 4, and Robin, age 2, using an AK-47 rifle. Following the crime, he was sentenced to life in prison. After 15 years of incarceration, he contacted me and he requested a parole evaluation. Although Nel killed 3 people, this does not qualify him as a serial killer. He committed familicide, family murder, including infanticide. Unlike serial killers, his motive was known. Most family murders are motivated by financial gain, by revenge, or by a new love interest. The question of why did he kill them is more easily answered than the question, how could he have done it in cold blood? He must be a psychopath. But he was not. To unravel the thread that eventually led to triple homicide, one needs to trace it back to Uyselen's childhood. Uyselen told me he grew up in a strict, authoritarian household. His father had an extensive weapon collection, which included 40 weapons. It is not unusual for South Africans to own many weapons, and his father was an avid hunter. Uyselen himself was taught to shoot as a toddler, and by the age of 8 or 9 years old, he already owned his first firearm. He accompanied his father on regular hunting trips, and he shot his first kudu at 13 years. He said he became addicted to guns. He noticed the calming effect that discharging a gun had on him from a very early age. At the age of 16, Uyselen was awarded Eastern Province colours for shooting, and he represented the team on the national championships. He received a silver medal for this. His hope was that his father would finally acknowledge him, but he was disappointed, as his father never attended any of his sports activities. In the 1980s, the white males of South Africa were conscripted, and they had the choice between joining the defence force or the police force. In 1986, Uyselen chose the police force, for his father was a police reservist and he loved guns. He was transferred to the collision unit in Pretoria, and he worked there from 1989 until 1994. Uyselen described the period as the collision unit in his career as such. It actually was a dream job, that is, if you could handle all the corpses. I quickly became emotionally detached. A person cannot believe how quickly you become used to seeing corpses. It was only the most mutilated and gruesome of scenes that is still shocking to you. That and the corpse of a young infant or a baby. Nobody makes jokes at an accident scene where these are present, but all other corpses were fair game for humorous barbs. He told me at some of the collisions that he attended, there would have been 11 bodies on one scene. Now, whilst working at the collision unit, he was also doing normal patrol duty. He always had a rifle behind his seat, and he confessed to me that he would shoot cats and other animals and road signs at random. He said his father hated cats. He was acutely aware of the stress relief effect that he experienced when he discharged the firearm. I really loved pulling a trigger, he said. He met his wife, Natasha, in 1990, and in 1991, when she fell pregnant, they got married. He was excited about the birth of his first son, Marius, but he could not bond with him. He became increasingly possessive in his marriage to Natasha, although he himself had had an affair. They had a second son, Robin, to whom he was closer. He requested a transfer to the Internal Stability Unit in Port Elizabeth to move away, as he said, from his interfering mother-in-law. They settled in Uitenhage, but the marriage deteriorated fast due to lack of communication and his alcohol abuse. In 1995, he was awarded Junior Springbok colours for target shooting. He was sad that he could not share it with anybody, but he informed his parents. At the end of 1995, he was part of a group sent to Umtata as a reaction force to prevent sporadic violent outbreaks. During that time, he found an AK-47 in an abandoned government car, and he told me he took it. He said the moment he took possession of that AK-47, he began toying with the idea to kill his wife. After learning that Marius had leukemia, Uyselen's dark thoughts intensified. He began fantasizing about a life without his family, rationalizing that the idea of their deaths would be a solution to all his problems. The financial benefit of Natasha's life insurance also played a role in his decision. On Saturday, the 10th of February 1996, he attended a barbecue at his father's house. No one was aware that he had stowed the AK-47 in the boot of his car. When it was time to leave, he attached his motorbike to a tow bar, and he told his wife they needed to drive to a detour to visit a man who was interested in buying the motorbike. Then, along the deserted stretch of road, he stalled the car. He got out, lit a cigarette, and made as if to inspect the engine. He disabled the car. He attempted to restart it. He told his wife he was going to take the motorbike and drive to his father's home to fetch a truck to tow the car. So he unhooked the bike. He then opened the boot and he took out the AK-47. Uyselen described what happened to me as follows. As I cocked the slide and the chambered in the road, at this point I was standing behind the vehicle and facing backwards with a gun in my extended right hand and pointing the muzzle downwards. I do not know how long I was standing like that. It might have been 15 or 30 seconds. What I do remember at that point is I had serious doubts about shooting my family. While I was standing there, my right hand was steadily increasing its pressure on the grip of the firearm. This was not a voluntary action. Then suddenly, without me wanting to pull the trigger, the firearm discharged a round right next to my foot. When that round went off, I felt the shrapnel of the tar hit my leg, and I heard the explosion from the muzzle, and I reacted instinctively. I spun around, and in a flash, I shot 2 rounds through my wife. I then moved to the passenger side where I shot my eldest son, Marius. At this stage, I registered that Robin was screaming. I wanted him to be quiet because his screaming was chilling and it cut me to the bone. It was the single most frightening and appalling sound that I had ever experienced. Then I shot Robin, who was seated on the back seat. This whole tragedy happened in less than 4 or 5 seconds. I can remember it because it's an act that appalls me, and I will never forget the insanity of it for the rest of my life. I willingly took the life of innocent people who trusted me for their safety, and the guilt still kills me at times. I cannot say whether I still would have committed the crime if the shot did not go off in the first place. I do know this, the first shot in the ground right next to me definitely was the catalyst that set me in motion. I know this is not an excuse. It is only another cog in the chain of events that should never have happened. I can never justify this action of mine. It was an appalling, unpardonable crime for which I had to pay. It did not take the detectives very long to figure out that this was not a blotched hijacking. Uyselen was arrested and he confessed. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. In St. Albans prison, the same prison where Stuart Wilkin was incarcerated, Uyselen was accommodated in a single cell. Being a police officer, his life would have been worthless if he was placed with the other criminals. He began repairing electrical appliances because he was bored, and he assisted the prison electrician to such an extent that he was allocated an office, and eventually he became responsible for the electrical maintenance of the whole prison. He also commenced his studies and he received a bachelor's degree in education in 2008. At some point in prison, a cat moved into his cell. Since he was lonely, he began caring for this cat, and the prison wardens would pay him with cat food for repairing their private electronic equipment. He had 3 cats in prison and he loved them very much. Now, this is the same man who used to kill pets for fun. Psychologists analyzed Uyslen's behavior in 1996, revealing a complex psychological profile. While his 1996 evaluation indicated a schizoid personality, my re-evaluation in 2011 demonstrated significant growth, showcasing maturity, remorse, and insight into his past actions. None of us could classify him as a psychopath. He had outgrown his immature coping skills, trying to solve any problem with violence. His IQ had increased from average to genius. In prison, Uyselen had learned to communicate and to show compassion. After 19 years in prison, Uyselen was released in 2014. He immediately married a woman whom he had known when he still lived in the barracks before he met Natasha, and together they built a new life. His family had transformed, and his father had sold his gun collection, making amends for his authoritarian style. They were ready to welcome Uyselen and his new wife back into their family. Uyselen vowed never to touch a gun again in his life. His self-worth no longer lay in a firearm. He had conquered that demon. Then tragically, just over a year later, in October 2014, he died in an accident while working as an electrician. Reactions to his death were mixed. Some viewed it as justice, and while others sought forgiveness. Would Apollo have been satisfied that Hercules had cleansed his spirit from evil? Forensic psychologists are not there to condone, condemn, or to judge. You decide for yourself. For a deeper psychological insight into the parole report of Uyselen Nel, please join my Patreon account by clicking on the QR code. Also, visit my website, mickipistorius.co.za, for an article. Give us your thumbs up if you like these videos, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Next week, we meet another killer cop who is a serial killer in our trilogy of killer cops.